He is saying, I am the lamb.
Huh?
I am the lamb, and you, my children, have given me life.
Yeah!
Or, the lamb is the people, and the milk is socialism.
Between Eisenstein's editing, Stanislavski's method acting, and Konchalovsky's Tango and Cash, the language of film is eternally indebted to the cinematic pioneers of Russia and the former Soviet Union, even if Hollywood has a funny way of showing it.
Must crush capitalism.
Largely relegated to broad villainy, shifty spies, and drunken malcontents, Western portrayals of the Eastern Bloc were never particularly hospitable and have seldom thawed since the Cold War.
All of you can kiss my Russian ass.
With a concerted effort over the last 20 or so years, Russia has responded by cultivating, financing, and distributing a stable of ambitious, extravagant features to rival the explosive blockbusters and prestige tentpoles of their English-language counterparts. As a result, their highest-earning motion pictures began to look less like this, and more like this. But why did Russia trade in its glacial, thoughtful art house for extravaganzas of excess? This is an enormously complicated subject steeped in economics, geopolitics, and globalization, and I know most of you just want to see a bear with a Gatling gun, so here's a grossly oversimplified rundown of the history of Russian cinema. Shortly after the end of the Great War, and understanding film's potential to communicate state propaganda and Marxist ideals to the illiterate and non-native speaking populace, the Gerasimov Institute of Cinematography was founded to train and educate a generation of nationalist filmmakers. In turn, these state-funded creatives made a number of the major advances to the nascent medium, such as the use of montage and social realism. When their output slowed to a crawl following World War II, the Soviet Union supplemented their filmography with heavily edited and strictly vetted trophy films, giving many Russian cinemagoers their first diluted taste of foreign media. Following Stalin's death, state control over artistic content was slackened. This allowed directors like Andrei Tarkovsky and Sergei Parajanov to inch forward and explore heady concepts and abstract ruminations, albeit still firmly on the editorial leash of the USSR State Committee for Cinematography. It wasn't until the late 80s and early 90s when Eastern cinema took its greatest stride towards freedom of expression. As Mikhail Gorbachev restructured the Communist Party and the Soviet Union dissolved, experimentation with the form and critical examinations of Russian history became acceptable creative pursuits. The market continued to expand, and with the ever-growing demand for new and more eclectic releases, American media began its cultural infiltration. And that's where the bear with the big gun comes into play. With the fall of the Iron Curtain, the sudden influx of frantic action, special effects showcases, and gung-ho war movies from the US acted as a catalyst for a new generation of filmmakers, the first to cut their teeth without constant threat of state intervention, in exile from the industry, or worse.
Shoot her before him, but make sure he sees it. Or in this one, kill him, take him to his church, dump him in the pulpit. And I'll leave the rest up to you.
To satiate the taste for spectacle, and to appeal to a global market, these upstart directors began brazenly integrating Western ideas into their work. One of the first major crossover successes of the millennium was Timur Bekmambetov's pair of supernatural, weirdo action hybrids, Night Watch and Day Watch. With the back-alley grime and ultra-violent chic of Blade, and smatterings of rich lore, Night Watch in particular was embraced as an invigorating marriage of rollicking, fast-paced adventure, flavoured with enough eccentricity to partially justify its incredibly muddled plot and disappointing second chapter. Unlike the rest of the directors I'm about to talk about, Bekmambetov hit Hollywood after his initial domestic run, though the passable wanted and nowhere near as fun as it should be Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter never managed to parlay his potential into much more than bland, forgettable hokum. If there's any director that is wholly committed to emulating the expensive-looking, mentally inert trappings of the American studio system, it's Fedor Bondarchuk. This man is the large-scale, genre-hopping titan of modern Russian cinema. Cribbing the hollow exuberance of Michael Bay, the speed-ramping slow-motion fetishism of Zack Snyder, and destructive melodrama of Roland Emmerich, Bondarchuk is a filmmaker creatively indebted to the big razzle-dazzle of the Hollywood machine. Responsible for a number of the highest-grossing Russian features of all time, Bondarchuk's output is a fascinating case study in derivative works that bolster the strengths and magnify the weaknesses of their American equivalents. From city-leveling sci-fi guff like Attraction and its sequel Invasion, to the patriotic explodathon of Stalingrad, the visual effects work is bleeding-edge, best-in-the-business phenomenal. They're shot in such a way that largely avoids frame-fucking incoherence, the geography of each photoreal hellstorm is expertly presented for clarity and impact, and then someone opens their mouth to speak, and everything nosedives.
100 раз рассказывала, опять надо?
Stalingrad proves that What If 300 was set in the Second World War doesn't make for compelling characters amidst the bullets and bombshells. Attraction and Invasion are even worse examples of the vacuum created by chasing bombast over quality. They're high-gloss eye candy in service of an insipid, abysmally sketched love story, backed by nonsensical plots that skew dangerously close to fascist propaganda. Attraction celebrates a nation where the schools stay open and bad raves go uninterrupted by the arrival of a city-destroying spaceship that just killed hundreds if not thousands of people. Turn up the bass, everyone I know is fucking dead. While Invasion uses at least half its runtime to lament how foreign powers are hacking Russian democracy and undermining their government. This is what happens when you try to make marketable, globally enticing popcorn fodder at the behest of politicians holding the purse strings. While Russia's come a long way from Stalin and the agitprop film production of the early 20th century, a reliance on government cash still leads to the kind of jingoistic pandering concessions that leave reviewers groaning as audiences are told to shovel down this self-aggrandizing waffle. That is until a bear and his boomstick took a big old shit and threw everything into question. 2017's Guardians is exactly the kind of disaster you'd expect from a low-effort, passionless attempt to capitalise on superhero fever, with off-brand bravado and transparently nationalistic intentions. Sycophantic patriotism is one of the few cultural exports every country makes in vast quantities that nobody else wants. Cheesy, cheap, and so poorly written I thought the subtitles were broken, Guardians was just excruciating. Mirroring the stateside slip-ups of Justice League from the same year, Guardians acted as a critical and commercial tipping point that tried to run before it could walk, resulting in cancelled sequels, critical damnation, and public humiliation all around. If only we realised copying the Marvel formula was a terrible idea! Time will only tell if one gigantic bomb is enough to right the ship of all-surface, no-substance blockbusters coming out of Russia. Lord knows it's a lesson America never learned, because if there's anything to be gleaned from the Disneyfication of the box office dollar, it's that originality and intelligence have never been deal-breakers. All things considered, I'm enormously optimistic when it comes to these kind of Russian tentpoles, having long since established themselves as the creators of some of the greatest films ever made. And this was while operating under the strictest of conditions. Many of the greats of the largely self-contained 20th century era of Russian cinema would later find their DNA folded into the work of global Arthouse auteurs and go big or go home event movies. Solaris' ruminations on guilt beget much of Inception, and spawned its own underrated English-language remake, while Battleship Potemkin's Odessa Steppe sequence remains one of the most parroted moments in film history. Now in a position of greater commercial viability, there's even more room for the diversification of the stories they tell. as Russia starts to marry their lineage of palate-cleansing cinematic smarts with their newfound proficiency in debris-shaking spectacle, we're all set to reap the rewards of their Eastern promise. A playful ruffling of Karl Marx beard for our Patreon producers, Jennifer C, Claire MD, Becky O, and Nicholas Lair Revere, and a gift-wrapped hammer and sickle set for all these amazing folks who support us over on Patreon. Have you seen any of the recent spate of Russian blockbusters? And overall, what are your favourite Russian films of all time? If you could click like, subscribe, the notification bell, and leave us a comment down below, that all helps enormously in the promotion of these videos. And if you're in a position where you're able to do so, consider checking out our Patreon at the link in the description below. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, this is In Frame Out.